Just tell them don't sit by each other. In an event that's outside, it's less of a chance for you to spread anything outside. Still be wearing your mask too, by the way. So anyway, that's just my opinion. I don't think it's be that terrible for them to allow people to come to sporting events. You don't have to fill up the place. Just let a third of the people in and tell them spread it out, man. Spread it out. Take any seat you want. Just don't sit next to anyone. 6 feet apart. Still maintain that distance. Maintain your social distancing. So NASCAR had a race. The UFC had, I think they've had 2 events in UFC. And one of the fighters tested positive and had to back out of the fight. He tested positive for coronavirus. And 2 of his guys he works with, trainers, cornermen. That's what they call them, cornermen. But those are guys who train him, help train for the fight. 2 of them tested positive for coronavirus, and this guy had to back out. See, I can't remember the guy's name, but a UFC fighter. So we're reopening the country. There are guidelines for reopening, which has to happen. But it would be so much better if there was more testing going on. I know the president is afraid that the numbers are going to go up. Of course the numbers are going to go up, but also what you're going to find out from testing is people who have already had the virus and they've gotten past it with their own antibodies that their immune system created to fight the virus. So those people will be immune to the virus until there's another strand that comes out of nowhere. But the UFC has had 2 events, 2 fights. I didn't watch them. I'm a big sports fan. I like the UFC, but I don't like it. I've never actually paid for a pay-per-view event of any kind. All Tyson fights used to be pay-per-view, and then a couple of Mayweather fights. But I always managed to see them for free. Going to someone else's house or to a bar or something and watching it. And this UFC, I don't know if that was on pay-per-view or not. They usually have these UFC events on pay-per-view. So I don't know if that one was or not. But the UFC had couple events. One fighter tested positive and had to back out, but they still went on with the event. That everyone else that was fighting tested negative, so they were okay. But NASCAR is going to have another race in Darlington. I guess what they're going to do now is usually in NASCAR. For those of you who are not NASCAR fans, you might find this interesting. Usually in NASCAR, they travel around to different racetracks. They go to the same ones every year. The same tracks all over the country. And usually what they do is the NASCAR starts in February, usually with the Daytona 500, which is their biggest race. Commercially and monetarily, you get the most money for the Daytona 500, but it's on a super speedway, meaning the cars go faster and there's a lot more wrecks because of it. The style of racing, it's a restrictor plate race. I don't have time to get into it, what that means. Restrictor plate race, look it up, Google it. I've talked about it before. I'll talk about it again in the future. But time being, the reason I mentioned it is because what NASCAR is doing, something interesting, is they usually travel around to these racetracks and they go have a race at each one of them twice. Like they'll go in the springtime and have a race, and then they'll go back a couple months later and have a night race at a lot of the tracks. They'll have a race at night, which looks kind of cool. You know, they shine all these lights on the track and they have these guys racing at night, which the lights, there's so many lights, well, you can tell it's dark out, but still, there's so many lights that it don't really seem to affect the drivers that much, because these cars don't have headlights. These race cars, they got stickers of headlights on where the headlights would be, which is funny. Because when I first started watching NASCAR, like I say, I'm a sports fan, but I don't watch many of these races at all anymore. They don't have the big names in there anymore. They don't have the guys that I used to watch, Jeff Gordon and Dale Earnhardt, Tony Stewart, you know, Carl Edwards, you know, Ricky Craven, Dale Jarrett, Rusty Wallace. You know, guys like that are not, they're all retired. So all they got now is a bunch of biscuit head little bastards. Those snot-nosed bastards, you know, calling each other the N-word on the radio. Racing now. I mean, the races are still probably good, competitive. You know, the technology has increased. You know, cars might be, you know, better, but for me, I was watching it, and you know, I like the fact that they had the big names, big name drivers out there. You know, the Earnhardts and the Gordons, Stewarts, Wallace. You know. So Jarrett, those guys aren't out there anymore, so I'll pass. Maybe I'll get around to watching some races, but NASCAR is going to have both of the races. They're going to have a race. They had a race on Sunday in Darlington, South Carolina, I do believe. And then they're having another race on Wednesday. So they're going to stay there and go ahead and have both races at the same time. Like one on Sunday and then the night race is going to be on Wednesday night, which I think is a good idea. Whoever came up with that, that's a good idea. Instead of traveling somewhere else and coming back, let's just have both of these races right here this week. So it's going to be still going to be pretty tough though to have the basketball. I think the NBA come back. Baseball, they can manage that. Like I said, the game is outside. It's more difficult. Like I said, for the players, it's all about being in the dugout, staying away from each other. Because when they're out there on the field, in baseball, those guys are not close to each other anyway. You know, there's the pitcher's out there by himself. The batter, the catcher, and the umpire are the only ones that's really close. And, you know, they got their gear on and they can always put on a mask under their catcher's mitt and the umpire. But it's the basketball. Those guys are running up and down the court in close quarters and sweating on each other and stuff like that, man. So it's the basketball. Football, by the time football season starts, those guys will be out of shape, though. They're supposed to be, you know, in training camp right now. Especially college. They're supposed to already have had spring practices and playing scrimmage games in college football. They're supposed to have already done that. And they had not done anything. I think they had a few practices in college football before they shut thing down. But football, they wear a lot of equipment, helmet. They can always wear shields on their helmets to, stop the, anything going back and forth between the players. The players a lot of them already wear gloves, so they don't have to be touching each other or anything really. So football, they can manage. It's not when they're on the field that's the issue for football. It's when they're off the field in the locker room and at practice and stuff. That's the problem. Plus all the coaches, none of them are wearing equipment. Coaches and trainers and stuff, they gotta wear a mask all the time around these guys. So I think by the time football season starts, we'll be past the point where all the states have reopened by then and tried to get everything, back going. Football got lucky because this coronavirus actually started in January. We just didn't know about it because the president and the rest of the politicians who were already briefed on it, they downplayed it. So they just decided not to say anything in January. And then, we had the Super Bowl in February. So that's a whole month that they was not saying anything. And, the Super Bowl happened. And all the people that go to that, media and fans, players, coaches, everybody there. So, but football, by the time it comes back around, I think they'll be okay with that. But, a lot of, they shut down production on a lot of TV shows, except for talk shows where people can do that stuff from their house. Some people still go to the studio. Like I see Chris Cuomo, who was coronavirus positive, has gotten over the coronavirus and is back in the studio. He is back in his studio. Was watching a show, and he's back in the studio. So talk shows are still producing their talk show. I've seen Jimmy Kimmel was in a Twitter fight with the president. The president, he's so obsessed with Twitter. Hydroxychloroquine and Twitter. That's the president. Here's one thing that's funny. I seen a doctor on TV talking about the president admitting that he's taken hydroxychloroquine, and this doctor on TV said that he should watch out for the side effects because him being in his age bracket and being obese, he was more susceptible to side effects from hydroxychloroquine. I was like, obese. He would love to hear that, man. As much as he made fun of fat people before he was president. Specifically Rosie O'Donnell. I seen him talking about Rosie O'Donnell years ago. Yeah. This doctor said President Trump was obese. Which is funny. Because he was bragging about how he's like a regular person. I eat like a regular person, eating a lot of fast food, cheeseburgers and fried chicken and stuff. Yeah, Mr. President, yeah. But you shouldn't be eating like that, though. That's nothing to brag about, my man. Especially now, you're the president. You should be eating gourmet, nutritious dishes, that if there is such a thing as nutritious